I am so excited to have my guest, Roxie Strohmenger, who is the Vice President of Customer Experience Strategy for UKG, a provider of human resources payroll, a workforce management solutions company with more than 14,000 employees. Roxie came to UKG from Forrester, which is a research company that anyone who's been in the CX world for any amount of time is very familiar with, one of the leaders. And she came over in 2018. There she had led a customer experience practice centered around the CX index, which is something she co-created at Forrester. And it helps organizations diagnose their CX quality and identify how to improve their outcomes. This visibility into what drove others' program success helped Roxie bring in new practices that matured UKG's program. She is very focused in using data to diagnose the most efficient and effective way to target resources to improve the customer experience in ways that maximize business impact. She was recognized at the CXPA's CX Impact Award in 2020 and now sits on the CXPA Board of Directors, which
alongside with you.
I'm honored to be work alongside with you on. And she is also a finalist for the CX Leader of the Year in 2020. Yeah. So, Roxie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation.
So excited. And first, since you mentioned the board, tell me about, I want to ask about how you got, let's start with how you got into the CX world and you had background, I don't know if I mentioned, but you spent your undergraduate degree, your graduate degree in psychology?
So I've always been intrigued regarding how people think, why they behave the way that they behave, and so forth. So interestingly enough, I went into undergrad thinking I was going to be a virologist. So I was very into like biology and all of that, then took my first intro into psych and then started to really go, this is something, and not the psychologist route or the psychiatrist route. It was more of the research side. Like, let me try to understand why we behave the way we do. And so went that route for my undergrad, and then was very lucky to get into grad school. And the focus was there on behavioral sciences, heuristics, decision-making, the role of emotion, like all of the stuff that I am so focused on now was sort of born out through that education. And then did some consulting for a while, and then landed myself into Forrester. And that was about almost 13 years. And just did a lot of work in helping companies be smarter about how they engage with customers. But it wasn't always with CX. It was in different ways of how do we, at the time, this was when Forrester came out with the Groundswell book. And it was like, well, how do you use technology to engage with customers? Social media, that was when all of that sort of was really boring out. And then I kept creating different data frameworks for Forrester and how we supported companies. And then had the wonderful opportunity to collaborate with Megan Burns. And that was when we co-created the CX Index, and then had the great opportunity to basically build a product around that and a whole line of business and a team. And then that just continued going, working in partnership with Carly Manning and other great people like Rick Parrish and others. And then that was when UKG came calling and said, do you want to do this for one person, one company? And sort of flesh that out. So it's been a meandering evolution, but always with the bedrock of the end of the day, how do we understand a customer's perception of something? And how does that influence their behavior? And how do we lean into that in a meaningful way? And so that's sort of been the ethos for everything that I've been doing throughout my career.
And your roots go deep into research, right?
Yeah. I'm a researcher at heart through and through. I'm extremely inquisitive. Like, you can say a comment about something or a fact, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Let me research that. And it's completely outside of the bounds of like work life. It could just be like a really interesting fun fact. And I'm like, oh, let me learn more about that. So I love me a really good Trivial Pursuit game on that
Uh-huh.
front. But yeah, I'm just constantly wanting to learn. That's
Okay.
fun.
You're going to be on my team. I will not play against you in Trivial Pursuit. The learner, so that's one of the, the strengths finders. Learner's one of the 34 strengths they have. I bet that's
Yep.
high up on yours.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's just it's interesting. It's interesting to watch how people think, watch how people grow. I mean, at the end of the day, right, we're all interacting with each other in this community, and that we should all try to figure out how to help each other be better and
Mm.
evolve. And I think that's where, like, in everything, personal, work, whatever it may be, society, I think that's a really interesting challenge and opportunity.
Yeah. And I think, for me, the field that we're in, for me, it's, we don't realize it oftentimes, but when people have a good experience or a bad experiences, it
Mhm.
can change the trajectory of their day.
Yep.
So it really is. If you think about starting your day, you don't realize how many times you're calling, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, whether it's going to the coffee shop or it could be a government agency of any kind, using your phone, calling a customer. You interact many times a day,
Yeah.
and it could either make or not make your day, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing, it's like the one of the things I always sit there and I always like try to understand is, okay, so what is a situational attribution and what's a dispositional attribution? And sort of sit there and go, okay, what are the environmental stressors? What's going on that is contributing to, so it's a lot of like problem solving in the moment, in every moment, to sort of sit there and go, okay, this is what's going on. This is why a customer perceived it, or your friend perceived it, family member perceived something that happened. Okay, so how do we work through that? So it's just really interesting because, we're irrational actors at the end of the day. Like we've Kahneman and Tversky, with all of the great research that they've done, talking about that. And so it's like, okay, so how can we sit back and appreciate those interactions, whether it's with human to human, us with, a company and things along those lines. It's like, okay, so how can we get to a point where it's a mutually beneficial interaction, relationship, partnership, whatever it needs to be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, tell us about UKG and what it does.
So we are we're the one of the largest private software companies in the world. Really proud of it. We're in B2B SaaS. We basically supply the technology to help companies run their payroll, their HR, their benefits, workforce, so time and attendance, elements into that mix. We serve over 70,000 customers globally.
Wow.
We keep growing in terms of the number of UCrewers, so that's what we call ourselves, into the mix there. It's really, at the end of the day, our purpose is people. So obviously, given my background, resonated very nicely when I shifted from Forrester to UKG. And it's really about, I always sort of sit there and say, we need to make our customers confident and successful in how they use our solution, because at the end of the day, they are empowering their employees to live their best selves and live their best lives, whether it's through the benefits that the company provides, and we are the technology vehicle to make that happen, to realize the benefits that somebody has at a company, payroll, so that you can then be paid, pay your mortgage, pay for the joys of life, into the mix. So I'm really excited that we're a company that is sitting there and saying, not only do we have this technology solution, but we're helping to make your life work environment better as a result, onto that piece. So it's a really great mission.
Yeah, yeah. And where I worked at the bank I worked for, UKG was our provider for, all of our time and all of our benefits. And to your point, it's not just UKG providing a great service; it's a reflection of your employer when you become aware
Yeah.
of all of the benefits that you have that you may or may not have been aware of, and then just making it easier to do your job and understand, for example, putting in your hours, or if you're a manager, approving other people's, like, why does it have to take, an hour and a half to get this done? And
Right.
UKG really simplified that process.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's always, and we've heard this, right? The frictionless experience and so forth. And yes, it needs to be frictionless, but it needs to be intuitive. It needs to have a purpose of, how do we make this work in the evolution of an employee from when they apply for the job through that whole cycle to when you go through performance reviews. Like, how does that all get tethered together in a central way that you can sort of sit there and say, my company has my back and they are making it as easy as possible to ensure that I reap all of the benefits that are available or afforded to me.
Right.
So it's really, it's great. It's really nice to be a part of a company like this.
And this day and age with employees, walking out, the great resignation, it's important to, this is not about necessarily, expending more money as an employer. This is about communicating what you've already committed to.
And it's anticipating your employees' needs, right? And it's sort of sitting there and saying, okay, we're seeing that an employee is doing this behavior and this behavior, and it's not a monitoring element. It's more of sitting there and going, maybe we need to lean in and if they're taking this training and this training and understanding that and saying, oh, okay, they're wanting to seek opportunities for a promotion. So what else can we provide within the solution to be able to empower that and make sure that they are exposed to all of the training that's needed? So it's from a purposeful approach to sort of sitting there and saying, that's what you're leaning in on, let's help you with that. If it's benefits and you're looking through all of these FAQs, okay, so maybe we need to provide a one-on-one conversation and talk through how to leverage that benefit. So and our solution being the vehicle by which that's being communicated in an effortless way.
And what you're discussing and what you're describing here, you're making it sound fairly simple, but my guess is behind the scenes, there's a lot of different places you need to orchestrate people, things, data you need to pull together. And so tell me about, like, when you first got there, and it was only a few years ago, right, that you were
about 4.5 years now.
What, 4.5 years? So what did you kind of say, okay, this is the first real problem I need to go after?
So I think, so when I joined, and for context, at the time in 2018, it was Ultimate Software. We merged with Kronos right at the beginning of April 2020. So that was a fun process to do a merger in a pandemic. I feel that that's a Harvard business case in the making. But at the time when I joined, a lot of it was sort of sitting there and saying, what do we need to focus on and double down? So from a service experience, it was very much, we are a partner for life. That was the mantra that we had. So what does that actually look like? And how do we, like, there was goodness already cultivated, but now how do we really expand on that? And what are the things we need to double down into that context? So it was very much like going in, did a long listening tour, was probably about 2 months worth of talking with everybody up and down the org, across all the different business units, really sort of figuring out, okay, so where are the friction points, where are those moments of truth, understanding even the stakeholders I would be working with. So this is a lot of where, so I mentioned this a lot, to be that indispensable advisor. I sort of say it's a mix of a couple of different attributes. It's sort of being a psychologist in a bit, being a marketer, being a data scientist, and being a consultant, and sort of like aggregating those different attributes together and sort of sitting there and saying, okay, so this stakeholder, this is what matters to them. This is how they process information, because some of them will be very data centric. like their language is data. So if you speak to them about numbers and so forth, they love it. Some need to be communicated through a manner of personal relationships and dynamic, right? Just having these sort of coffee style type conversations to build that. Some speak through the language of process. Okay, talk to me about execution. What is that? And you're all answering the same question. You're just putting a different frame of reference on it that resonates with them. So it was a lot of sort of figuring that out and then sitting there and saying, oh, okay, so this is the double down. And so that was what I really focused on in the first year was, okay, so where are the double downs? This is what we're going to focus on. We did some immediate sort of co-creation style journey mapping work, and really sort of identified key areas where we needed to tighten things up a bit and really resonate with customers. Also fleshed out the VOC program that we established, a team. So all of that. So in the last 4 years, it's been a really interesting and really fun evolution on a variety of different fronts. I mean, we went from a team of 1 to a team of, we're now 12 people.
Wow.
Into the mix in just 4 years. We've engineered a really meaningful, we call it U-Speak, is the branded term for our VOC program. Have done that one time, did that again when we merged. So because we wanted to do a unification exercise. So it's been a fun journey, to say the least.
So I would pull up about 30,000 feet and just reflect back on what you said. And if I'm a CEO of an insurance company, of a wealth management, of a bank, and I'm listening to you and I don't already have a team in place, maybe I even do. What I heard you say was all of the things, all the tools, all the arrows in the quiver that a CX professional needs to have. And if you don't have that, and if you don't have someone in place, what would you describe sort of that gap? Like, describe for me how what it does for you to have someone without having someone there and then having someone there.
So from what my conversations with my stakeholders have said is, we've sped up the execution of delivering a good experience because the majority of them are going to be focused on operation and execution onto that piece.
Okay.
And a lot of it is there's not enough time to sit and think and to understand what matters most from a customer perspective, because from their perspective, and it's understandably so, it's about efficiency, cost to serve. They have to deal with margins and all of that. And so we come in that consultative manner and sit there and say, given that North Star for you, a business North Star, I need to make sure my margins are good. I need to reduce cost to serve, but not at the expense of a customer. So they'll lean into that. But what does it look like from the customer perspective? More times than not, they don't have enough time to really sit and think about that. So that was where I came in and said, okay, so that's my role. That's my team's role. We're going to think on your behalf and in a manner that is mutually beneficial for the customer and for you, where the experience can resonate even better. And that's sort of, once you position in that way, and then position it in either a data-centric way, process-centric way, relationship, or even this, let me tell you something you don't know, which is this cool, inquisitive way, like figuring out what resonates with them, they go, oh, okay. And then you tie, so it becomes like a daisy chain type of thing. So it's, you first figure out what matters most to them. And then you figure out what's the language they like to speak in. Then you figure out, okay, so how do you address the customer friction point, the moment of truth, figure out that piece. Then you bring it back to the language that they speak in. And then the final piece of the daisy chain is, okay, so what does that mean to you in numbers? Meaning revenue, money saved, whatever that is, into that mix, that you could do more with the existing headcount and not from exhaust the headcount where they're working more hours, within the confines of a good working relationship with employees into that mix. And that's where the fusion happens, and that's where it really resonates. But it's a constant analysis, problem solving, because I will tell you this, what matters most one year with a stakeholder can completely pivot into year two. They may start to lean in other things that matter to them that they didn't, and speak a different language, because human beings evolve. So it's like you're just constantly trying to understand your stakeholder. So that's where the fun part is. And maybe that's because of my psychology background and training and decision sciences. I'm like, oh, okay, so this is fun to sort of have that type of constant diagnosis going on.
Yeah. Well, and you said so much right there. I need to unpack some of it because you're so full of wisdom. But I feel like I'm imagining printing the T-shirt,
Yeah.
which is the 5-step model, which ends with fusion.
Yeah.
And I just want to repeat it because
Yeah.
it was so enlightening. What matters most to each person, each stakeholder you're talking to, speak in their language. Then identify where that customer friction exists.
Yep.
And then go back to them and figure out, in their language, how we can translate that into numbers.
Yep.
And that all equals fusion. I
There
love
you go.
that.
There's the recipe.
I love that recipe. I want to go back to what I asked you earlier, which is what in the world would happen if you didn't have a you,
Yeah.
meaning YOU, not you as in UKG, you. And I can't help but think of, the role as a analogy that Gene Bliss always said is human duct tape.
Yep.
Is what we are. But what would happen, then what happens in organizations that don't have someone like you or in a department like yours?
So what I saw during my time, at Forrester consulting then for a multitude of companies is you start to see the quote unquote CX team be relegated more to a cost center, and thought of as just, oh, that's a survey team. So then they become just the execution arm for the stakeholder to just get a data point. And then it stops there. And that's the thing is, we've heard all of, we've read all of the reports. I remember Harley wrote the report. It was actually right before the pandemic hit. Remember, it was sort of a 1 in 4 CX professionals will lose their job. And obviously this was before the pandemic hit, and there was a lot of different dynamics at play there, but because we haven't entrenched ourselves to be a must-have versus the nice-to-have and that piece. And so that was a really big thing for me. When I shifted into, Ultimate and now UKG, I wanted to immediately be the must-have, and I wanted to be something that they've never seen before. And so that was also part of the listening tour, was figuring out historically what they've been exposed to, what they were aware of. So a lot of it became a instructor, like an education, like let me walk you through. So how do we define CX? What does that mean? What does that look like? And so this got into, so my comment about being the marketer, it's like, then I was like, okay, so let me brand this. And I was like, okay, so let me tell you the 3-part CX story that I can tell you about your customer. And I was like, this is the first part of the story. Here's the second, here's the third. And it really came down to, let me start high level at like OSAT. Then let me drive into quality dimensions. Then we talk about drivers and specific elements of the behavior. And then let me tether it to your recipe for success. So we actually brand it is that and say, here's what you need to focus on. This is why it matters to you. And this is what you'll see as a result. And then we're going to be a part of it. And this is what a playbook looks like for how your organization can evolve. And it's when you do that beyond here's your data point, or here's your dashboard, or things along those lines, you then start to get the phone calls, which been very fortunate to have cultivated, and the team to have cultivated, is okay, so can you attend this QBR and walk through everything and help my leaders know what the next steps are? Can you sit at the executive meeting with the C-suite and give us an understanding of what's going on, why it's happening, and so forth? And that's when you really entrench quite nicely. And that was a big thing for me. Like and maybe this is to be frank, a sort of a personal chip on my shoulder is I don't want to be known as a market researcher. And it's not to sit there and say market researchers are not, like, it's a profession to not focus on, but when you're talking about CX, like, market research is a tool that a CX professional uses. And that was the thing, is I didn't want the organization to think like, oh, you just do research. So you capture the information and just give it back to me. I want to be right here at the side next to you, counseling you in the best interest of the customer, with a mindset that I know you need to protect margins, revenue, and all of that. And I'm going to make sure that that happens, but again, not at the expense of the customer. So let me be that side consultant into the mix. And that was a very purposeful approach to what I did and what the team did at UKG.
Very insightful, and it makes sense to me why you've started off on such a good track there. So one of the things that's coming to mind for me that I'd love to ask you about is ROI. I think you kind of brought it up, and it's the holy grail of for a CX practitioner. And I just got asked the question. I was on the phone with someone from Ireland this morning who's a CX practitioner, asking me about, how do we approach ROI and how do I make the case? Really struggling. I don't really like the idea of using Net Promoter Score. So for those who are not familiar with using ROI for NPS, there's a number of ways to do it, but essentially you might say that one way to do it is to look at maybe your detractors and say that segment of your customers is at risk, and that represents X number of dollars. That's one way, and that's sort of okay. That some people can grab onto that and say that's enough, but that wasn't going to work at her organization. But I wanted to ask you, how do you think about it? What would you tell other CX practitioners, perhaps, or even business owners and leaders? How a CX leader can help justify what they're doing, their work, by ROI.
So I think one of the things that you have to be able to answer pretty quickly is, in your industry, and anybody, because each industry is going to be different, how much direct impact does CX have to various KPIs, whether it's revenue, cost to serve, and so forth. One of the things that in certain industries, there is a direct one-to-one correlation between the better quality of experience, more and more customers buy more, right? So that will typically be the stereotypical linear relationship. It's lockstep. As CX gets better, revenue, people keep buying more and more. But a lot of times CX is not a direct corollary, and you have this happened and we changed this behavior. It's a lot more ancillary in terms of impact. So you have to sit there and understand, am I in an industry where my customers are trapped? Meaning they're under contracts.
Sure.
And so it's renewal cycles. So for us, our customers are signed on for 2 to 3 year cycles before you go through renewal period. If we think about the old days of wireless service providers, that was a scenario, right? That you would sit there and be like, well, I'm with X provider for 2 years. No matter what the experience is, I can't leave. So then and then there's other industries where customers aren't trapped. So when you understand that nuance, then you start to sort of flesh this out. So say they're trapped. So then the relationship between CX and revenue might not be as strong, but CX, the cost to serve, is. So then if you sit there and say, well, if I build a better experience, the employees don't have to do as much of A, B, and C anymore. So now the cost of them serving the customer goes down. So you might not sit there and say, here's the direct relationship to ARR, annualized recurring revenue, or whatever the revenue metric is, but you can sit there and say, we delivered a better experience, but actually did it more efficiently and with less cost, which helped our margin. So there's that link. So, and that's just one example. So that's the big thing for a CX professional, is to sort of sit there and say, am I in an industry where customers are trapped or not? They're not trapped. Is there a direct relationship one-to-one of, as 1 point CX increase, does it equate to revenue change? And then sit there, if it's trapped, are there other KPIs that matter to the business? The most common is going to be cost to serve, is one to sort of latch on to. Once you sort of figure that out, and it's a lot to like sort of digest that and so forth. The biggest thing is I don't recommend trying to determine ROI off of a high level metric, like an OSAT or an NPS or whatever. I'm metric agnostic in terms of whatever anybody uses. And if it works for you, run with that.
Right.
Where you see more power is when you focus on behavior change, like a driver, and link that to, so it's not about, because think of it this way for OSAT, and again, it's any of these high levels, there are so many sub factors that contribute to OSAT, that for you to sit there and say, well, when we moved OSAT by 1 percentage point, you can completely line it to a CX change, because it could have been something happened in the product, something happened in the service, something, you know, it's very hard. And that's where I think CX professionals sometimes get stuck, is that they're focusing on attributing the overall to a revenue metric, when instead, if you do a behavior, so say, for example, we doubled down on making our employees clearly communicate why an issue happened and why they didn't happen. And there's a metric to try to track that and so forth. And we sat there and said, we are going to improve that by 5 percentage points. That is an easier tie, because if a customer says, yes, they clearly communicated, then we latch on operational drivers. Well, how long did the call last? What did they talk about? What are the materials? You start to sort of see, okay, how you can chip away at the cost of serve. It's much easier. At the end of the day, all of that good work will impact OSAT, but what you're focused on is, here is the behavior change. This is what it equated to in a dollar amount. And then this is why CX matters. So I like to bring the ROI link way down the funnel, then keep it at the high level, because there's too much to impact NPS, OSAT, and those higher level metrics than was the employee knowledgeable? Did the employee clearly communicate? Did they show empathy? Those types of things, it's much easier to show the relationship. And then whether it's cost to serve, or whether it's revenue, whether it's retention revenue, enrichment revenue, advocacy revenue, and all of that type of stuff.
Yeah, those are just such great gems. Really easy. Well, it's almost easier in some ways to pull a high level metric and use that, but it's also less potent than if you take something that is lockstep, more of a direct correlation in the behaviors to the outcome. So also wanted to get your thoughts on an idea I had when you shared, because the call I had this morning was in a business that was a subscription-based SaaS company, but there are other, I was in banking, and I know you probably served banks when you were at Forrester. So the retail clients maybe not so much, but commercial banking clients are pretty locked in. They don't have a subscription, but they have high switching costs, right? They have cash management, treasury management. So that could be true for a lot of other businesses. And what part of my answer to her was, I went the same direction you went with the cost. You're either going to grow revenues or you're going to reduce cost, which means you're going to either acquire new customers or you're going to keep your existing ones. In the case of a subscription business, or even a business where you've got customers with high switching costs, there is share of wallet to be gained. Usually it's not one and done. Usually there's some add-ons that companies offer. And I'm sure that's true. Is that true for you, KG?
Yeah. So you would, one way to think about it is usually the relationship of CX to any dollar amount, usually revenue or even cost of service. So you have the, as I said, that linear, the lockstep, right? So that's very common in like a retail sector. The more the experience is better, the more you're going to buy from said company. Then you have what you would call diminishing relationship, where there is a certain point where no matter how much CX improves, they're not going to buy more. So take, for example, wireless. No matter how much a provider makes your wireless experience better, it's not like you're going to get another mobile phone or, a smartphone or more service. It's like, granted, you could sit there and say, well, maybe they get other services that the telco company has, but if you just kept it within wireless, it's diminishing. Then you have other sectors like ours, which is what you would call an exponential relationship. So once you get to a certain point, CX tends to accelerate the amount of leaning in. So the share of wallet, as you mentioned, in terms of additional products, additional services into the mix, because they're sitting there and saying, well, I'm in this relationship with you. This is going really well. And you'll typically see this in B2B more than anywhere else. I want to subscribe to more and be a part of more of this type of stuff. So for us, we heavily lean in on, well, how do we make the experience better? Because we see an acceleration in terms of additional products procured, services, things along those lines. So that's a big thing that CX professionals need to know is just in general, what is that relationship? Is it that linear lockstep, that diminishing? Because especially in a diminishing scenario, you don't want to double down more and more on CX because now you're spending too much effort, too much cost to do it. So then you sit there and go, okay, so what is then the ability to optimize the existing experience? Because if we've got the bulk of customers at that tipping point, business is good because you're in a retention game. Some of them are in the exponential, like our sector is, it's not only the retention game, but it's the enrichment game. And then how do you keep growing that share of wallet?
Love this conversation, by the way. This is the kind of thing that really should be talked about more. It isn't talked about enough. And I think, sometimes we have the scars to have gone through the wars. And so, which is a great segue to two questions I want to have, which the first one, and I ask people who are practitioners, and you're a practitioner, is what was a mountaintop for you? What was something, 4.5 years that you can already look back at and say, yeah, I'm proud of that. I'm glad that that's cool.
So I've been very fortunate. I've had a couple of mountaintop moments, both at Forrester and here at UKG. For UKG, I'm really proud of this team that has been cultivated, and that in all intents and purposes, we are an in-house CX consultancy. That was the vision. And that it's been realized to that level where we're brought in, and we're still in, and we're still at all of the conversations and at the table, and it's all the way up to the C-suite into that mix. So this vision of you can build a team that is thought about in that consultant-like manner does work into that mix. So it was really nice to, and I saw it here and there when I was doing consulting work at Forrester, but it was nice to sort of sit there and go, oh, I could actually build this with my team, and it resonates into that mix. So that's the mountaintop.
That's huge. I mean, you should take credit for that, because I mean, the people are great. It's gracious of you to give credit to the team. Any good leader would, but you built that team. You picked those people. Oh,
they're fabulous. They're absolutely, I am immensely blessed. I wake up every day, I'm going, how cool is it that I've got this CX, we're a CX strategy team. So it's the CX strategy family. And it is a family. I mean, we, are really invested in each other and our work and personal lives. And that's what matters.
Awesome. Well, and now let me ask the flip side of that, which is, we've all been there, if you don't mind getting vulnerable for a minute, is what might be a pothole moment for you that where you stepped in it and you, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't done that.
So for me, and if you I have, and I know this, I have a dominant personality type, and I get in and lean in more towards an education style approach. And sometimes that is, you need to go in a little bit slower. And so this gets into knowing which stakeholders are willing to go really fast and are open to being sort of like taught, right? Because a lot of them sit there. There's sometimes a belief of, because you deal with customers, you know, CX. And so there's a little bit of, okay, so how do we educate them of, yes, you understand that customer experience matters and the customer matters, but let's talk about the discipline into that mix. And I think that that's a unique hurdle as CX professionals we have, because a customer, an employee deals with customers, they're like, oh, I'm in the CX game.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you're in the ability to enable a quality experience, and you have experience on how to do the enablement elements, but let's talk about the practice and the execution and the, you know, the approach to it and what are best practices in the framework. So a couple times I went a little bit hot and heavy. But at the end of the day, this gets it to the dispositional and situational attribution. You have the conversation and you sit in, you lean in, and you let them know, like, this is, you know, you apologize for the misstep and going strong, but you sit there and say, well, this is where it's coming from. So it becomes, it's very easy as human beings, once we separate and say, like, oh, it's not a dispositional thing, it's a situational thing, and this is where you move forward quite quickly. And those were quick moments, or they're learning opportunities, and that's sort of how it ran. And it, I mean, we went from 0 to 60 pretty quick, but we did it in a really meaningful and partnering way. And you do what's in the best interest of everybody. So that's, yeah, that was sort of the step in moment, but it worked at the end. You turn it around.
Those are great. I love that you describe it as your CX strategy family.
Yeah, they are near and dear. I've actually very lucky. Several of the people in this current CX strategy family at UKG were part of my team at Forrester.
Oh,
so I tend to, I'm extremely loyal. Loyalty is big for me, and I've just been very fortunate to keep people that are fabulous talents and just keep them in the close world that we've created.
Yeah. Well, it says a lot that they would follow you over there and trust their careers with you. A couple of gems. I mean, so many gems in what you just shared, not only, you know, thinking about it and calling it a family, but let's see, you talked about treating the different stakeholders differently. Some are ready to go fast, some are not. And really, you know, more of the psychology, going back to what I heard you say throughout the interview, is that really you have to understand other people and where they're coming from and recognize. And I heard someone say, I don't know what you think about this, is don't spend all your time and energy trying to convince everyone in the C-suite, because in other words, spend your time on the people who are ready to go, who are not giving you the most friction. What do you think about that?
I agree. So what ends up happening is then it becomes a fast follow. So then if you've engendered a relationship with one C-suite, they also then become your advocate to the other C-suite. And on top of it, they go, look how cool this was. And they go, oh, so then you get a lot of, you know, FOMO going, and, you know, and they're like, well, I want that. It's like, great. So that's where part of the listening tour, you sit and figure out, okay, so who's wave 1, who's wave 2, who's wave 3, and you keep, and I will sit there and say, listening tours, those still happen 4 years running. So this is not a once you do listening tour, then like it is every year doing at least an annual or biannual listening tour to continue to understand and learn, because as you're growing as a human, they're growing, and you need to sort of see, okay, do I have to talk about things a little bit differently? Is there something that matters to them a little bit more than it used to because they've learned? So it's a constant, like I said, it's a diagnosis. Like that's why I think, yeah, you're a big forefront of those different attributes is a psychologist through and through. I think that's how you embed nicely.
Well, what a great conversation. I want to just land the plane here, but also I don't want to not mention the fact that you're featured in a new book.
Yeah.
And then I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the book and why someone might be interested in getting it. And two is, if people want to reach you just to check in and say hello, whatever, what would be the best way? But tell us about the book. That's very exciting.
So Jim Titcher of Heart of the Customer, that is his company that he founded. He is chief journey mapper, which I love, into that mix. So he really focused, CX historically is always, well, it's ethos, or its beginning stages was B2C, right? And its application, but CX actually matters a lot in B2B. Into that mix. And so he wanted to really double down on, okay, so what is the context of how do you do B2B better? And that's the title of the book. He interviewed several hundred CX professionals. I am honored. One of 4 in-depth case studies of change makers is how he defined us, that really sort of walks through what we've done in our organizations. What does success look like? And those elements. So it just published or just dropped on CXPA last week. There's a great conference next week on October, what day is it? The 18th, into that mix. And it's really going to focus on these examples of how to approach CX in a B2B world, which I think is an important topic. And then to reach me, LinkedIn, just search for me, send me a note. More than happy to connect. I love meeting new people, having recurring conversations, one-off conversations, whatever that is. I thoroughly enjoy connecting with new people every day.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Roxie. You were awesome.
Appreciate it. Looking forward to listening to other podcasts that you have with other leaders, because I constantly learn more and more hearing my fellow peers into the mix. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Roxie.